very proud of our American Indian Resource Center as it is nationally recognized for its programs which preserve and promote appreciation for our state's American Indian heritage. Today's ceremony is an example of the exemplary programming that has led to our national recognition. I would now like to take a moment to acknowledge the sponsors who helped make the Circle of Honor ceremony possible through their generosity. I would especially like to recognize the Maxine and Jack Zero Family Foundation. Maxine and Jack Zero have been longtime supporters of the American Indian Resource Center and have contributed significantly to the center since its inception in 2000. Sadly, Mr. Zero passed away earlier this year. We deeply miss him, but his family's legacy lives on. I would also like to thank our other sponsors that have helped make this ceremony possible. They are Cherokee Builders Incorporated, Bank of Oklahoma, Dr. Frank and Mary Shaw, College of the Muskogee Nation, Pawnee Nation, and the Friends of the Helmerich Library. Additionally, we would like to welcome Jeff Jones, Attorney General for the Osage Nation, who's joined us this morning. Thank you. The Tulsa City County Library believes that libraries change lives. We do this in many ways. One is by recognizing and sharing the culture and history of American Indians and providing a support system for them through our resource center. Another way we do this begins this year. This year, the Tulsa City County Library inaugurates its One Book, One Tulsa, a community-wide reading project. The library will identify one enjoyable book to read for a community reading program that will serve as a jumping-off point for discussions that will help our community with an issue we face. To complement and coincide with this reading project, the library has declared 2012 a year of food, gardening, health, and sustainability. Over the course of this year, we will offer 40 or more free programs that touch on this topic. One of these presentations is the College of the Muskogee Nation's Food Sovereignty exhibit that is on display here through March 31st. Another one will be Ben Yahola's presentation on indigenous food sustainability on March 31st at our South Broken Arrow Library. Check our website for updates on One Book, One Tulsa, A Year of Food. Now, please join me in welcoming our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Archie Mason, who is a member of our American Indian Resource Center Advisory Committee. Archie?
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's good to see all of you and the smiling faces here at the library and where things happen. And today is a very special day for members of the board and for the library as we're into the ceremony, the award that'll be given today. But it's my pleasure to do a little bit of talk right now, and I was instructed and asked to remind everyone to either put your cell phones on vibrate or buzz or ring softly or just turn them off. Because we are in a library and we're going to do something that's going to need all your attention. And unless you're calling me, well then don't use it. So that's okay. But we want to begin firstly, my pleasure to introduce a gentleman who was asked to come, who is a man who knows Mr. Kirke Kickingbird, our very special award winner. The gentleman I speak of is Dr. Perry Horse. He's a native of Carnegie, Oklahoma. Has been very active in his career through Washington, D.C. and activities there, throughout education, throughout law, throughout organizational kinds of constructors within tribes all over the United States. Worked at Sandia Lab out in New Mexico. It's very, very educated, very much a doer of things in Indian country and outside of Indian country. He's a member of the Kiowa tribe as a speaker and a traditional man who has worked in both worlds and has done so successfully. And at this time, we're going to ask him to come forward because he is also going to say some things of encouragement and advice, as that's what he does, and he does it well. So at this time, I'd like to invite and have a round of applause for Dr. Perry Horse. Sir, if you would come up.
Good morning. Thank you, Archie, for that introduction. And just so good to see everybody here. We all say in Kiowa, it's all good that you all came together. This is a happy day. A little bit more about my role. It's fallen upon me, I guess, in my Kiowa country down there around Carnegie, where I grew up. We have 3 major dance cultural organizations, men's societies: the Kiowa Blacklegs, the Kiowa Gourd clan, and the Kiowa Okuma Lodge, we call it. In modern days, it's been referred to as the war dance. We call it Okuma. Anyway, one of the reasons I'm here and been asked to speak is because somehow or other, I was drafted, really. I was accorded the honor of being a spokesman for the Kiowa Gourd clan and for the Kiowa Okuma Lodge at our annual encampments and gatherings at Carnegie and Anadarko, respectively, during the hottest time of the year in the state of Oklahoma. But we enjoy it because it keeps us connected to who we are as Kiowa people, and especially for me, who has spent so much time now away from the homeland. But every year I make that connection. And where I live now in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we have a lot of Kiowa families that live in New Mexico, and periodically we get together as the Kiowa Connection of Albuquerque, or KCA. Now, Kiowas can relate to that KCA because that's also the name of our old reservation, the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache Reservation, where we all grew up. So I just wanted to mention that because, not in our culture, not anyone is supposed to get up and speak to you in public like this unless they are a special occasion or honoring situation. And so we follow our ways. I've been accorded this honor to be a spokesman. And the only, it's good. We're going to have a series of songs and dances here in a while, but I just wanted to comment on that. I'm not a member of the Kiowa Blacklegs, so I will only say that's probably the oldest warrior society of the Kiowa people, and only the bravest of the brave were initially inducted into that organization. They were the chiefs, the war chiefs, the leaders, and they do their ceremony in fall down in Anadarko, what they call Indian City. And it's a very moving, very picturesque, it's a wonderful ceremony if you've ever been there. And the other important thing to keep in mind is these societies I'm talking about, they are not intertribal powwows. They are specific to the Kiowa culture, and we consider them as ceremonial songs and dances, and we hold them in really high regard. And so when we sing these songs and do these dances, it's a gift to us from Dog E. Dog E. Bege Dog E means the Great Spirit, and he's the one that gave us all of our culture here. Goit Og Yet Do. Our Kiowa culture. On the only, hito yat tain so do, domtai. It's wonderful that we're still able to carry on our culture on this land, this earth. We consider our land, our environment, to be a sacred trust that was given to us by the Great Spirit, and we continue to this day to revere our lands just like all other tribes. And I've traveled throughout Indian country, from Alaska to Florida, from Maine to California. And everywhere I go, I hear that same message, that we're here to take care of this land that belongs to us from our ancestors. And we uphold that belief, and it's a way of thinking. It's a philosophy. Yesterday I was at a conference in Dallas, Texas, and there was a huge delegation from the state of Hawaii, and they brought their native people there to speak about their native Hawaiian beliefs. And it goes under the term of hula, H-U-L-A, hula. When people hear that word, they right away think of young people or young women, men dancing in these grass skirts and all that. That's only a part of it. The way I understand it is the way that we believe, that it encompasses an entire belief system that was it was held in low esteem by non-Hawaiians for a long time, and it kind of was suppressed. But eventually they brought it back, and now they've revived their language and their cultural teachings from ancestors. And so it was very enlightening to me, because those are the indigenous people of the Hawaiian Islands saying the same thing that we say in our tribal colleges and universities, that we need to pay attention to what we have learned from the past. We want to be modern, but we also want to hang on to our identity as Native American, as American Indian people, and as tribal people, because you all know that our legacy in this land will be, when we leave, if our children, our grandchildren are still able to do some of these things that we're going to try to teach them as we go along. And so I'm always happy to see our young people. I know the Anq family, they're Kiowa people, and we always say, they're generous, useful. Mokuime means useful. They're useful, generous people. They help others, and that's our Kiowa way. The other two societies, the Okuma Lodge, again, that's a warrior-based society, and we inherited that type of tradition from the Cheyenne people many, many years ago. And my uncle, Matthew Whitehorse, has been the chief of our lodge since 1950, and he's still with us. He's 94 years old now, I believe. He can't do as much as he used to, but he taught us all these songs. And we go and we do our dance, and each of us members of the Okuma Lodge, we have our own song, or our families have a song. And so those are among our society, among our people. They know when you ask for sing my song or my family song, if you're from the Okuma Lodge, you'll know that song and you'll sing it. And so that's the way it works. And also, it's one of our honored traditions as Kiowa people to be honored with a Kiowa name, aside from your name of record. Like mine is Perry Horse. Well, among the Kiowa people, my name is Bai Bauda. Bai Bauda. It means when the sun first comes up, like sunrise. It's my own Kiowa name. And so we also have a saying in the Kiowa tribe that when you die, God's going to call you by your Kiowa name, so you better get one. So also the Okuma Lodge is comprised of, it's a man's society, but we have two honorary princesses, we call them. Ode Maton means princess or favorite girl. And so we have two Ode Maton, plural. And they're the two females who can go into our ceremonial teepee when we get ready to prepare for our dance. And they are the only two that can dance out in the arena with the men. And the other women who are there, they dance on the edge of the arena on the side. So never in the middle, like you'll see. And this style of dress that you'll see pretty soon, that came to us, the Kiowa people from the north. And that's good because our tribal history teaches that Kiowas originated far up into the Northland, Sai Peigu we call it, up north. Mongiaot, Anbaton. They said it was really cold up there. And in later years, anthropologists and ethnologists who studied our people have traced us back as far as the headwaters of the Columbia River. And then the migration took place over centuries, and we ended up in what is now called Yellowstone National Park. That's an ancient Kiowa homeland. And we have all those landmarks, Yellowstone Park now with all its beautiful, glorious scenery. Up in the Bighorn Mountains, near where the Crow Reservation is, there's a Sundance Lodge, the remains of, during the time when the Kiowas got the Sundance from the Crow people. And we became allies and friends with the Crows up in Montana, and we still maintain that to this day. They come down every fall to game with us, gaming, you know. They call it gaming now, but we even had that in the old days. I was preparing for my talk here to introduce my friend Kirke, and I was telling my wife, I said, you know, how do you say gaming, you know, or how do you say taxes, you know, stuff. So I finally had to figure it out, you know, and it's a good thing because I have all these resource materials that I use in teaching the Kiowa language, and even I have to do refresher things once in a while, and so I did find all the appropriate words and phrases I need to read his biography. Anyway, let's see, what on the Okuma Lodge too, we have a drum like the one out here, and the ancient symbol on that was a bolt of lightning, and that symbolized what we call the voice of thunder, the voice of thunder. And it's connected in that way to the last society I'm going to talk about is the Kiowa Daimpigo, Yakama. We call it Daimpi. Others say Gourd dance. And that same thing, that voice of thunder, our Gourd clan society is responsible in our culture when we hear the first thunder of the year in winter, hear the first thunder, our officers of our Gourd clan go and make a pilgrimage to visit all of the medicine bundles of the Kiowa people. There's 10 of them, and those were handed down from who knows when, ancient objects, revered objects, and they're still with us. When we camp down in Carnegie, they're down there. So it's our time, we call it. It's used to be tied to the central pole of the Sundance Lodge. There's all down there. And that dance we do, the Gourd dance they call it, that was one of the preparatory dances to the main Sundance ceremony, as well as the Okuma, the Blacklegs. They all did their dances, and then the main purpose of that encampment in early July was to conduct what our ancient religion, which white scholars have called the Sundance. We call it K'ato. K'ato means medicine lodge ceremony. And so we gather during that time of year, and it just happens to now coincide with the 4th of July weekend. And so when people think we're celebrating the Independence Day of the USA, you know, but it's really a date in history that we did our own celebration of our own Kiowa life through the Sundance. And this was way before our time, you know, like towards the end of the 19th century, about 1890 when they did the last Sundance, but the remnants of it are still with us. And believe you me, when we get down there in that arena, and I'm up there speaking, we can feel the spirit, especially on the last day when we sing those songs that we sing on that day. And it's a wonderful feeling, and it revives our feeling of pride in being who we are. Excuse me. And so that's just a short introduction to some of the songs and dances that you'll hear that come from those traditions. And it's just a good thing that I'm so proud of these young men that they've taken the time to learn these things. I knew their fathers, their mothers, they're my cousins, Anku family. Anku is Angu in Kiowa, wise person. Angu, that means the wise person. And so they come from a wonderful family. Their grandfather, Jimmy Anku, was a well-known composer of Kiowa songs. And so, aho, te onde, bako hape.
It is at this time that we're going to get into the part of the program that is why you're here. And, you know, as we get into awards, For us Indian folks, a lot of times it's gift giving. We like to give gifts. We're a giving people, as Dr. Horse said. Not only the Kiowa people, the tribes that I'm aware of and know, they're gifters. They like to gift, like to see something, and they give it away. And sometimes it's the best you can have that you give away from the heart. It's that kind of thing. And it's that way here. And this committee and what Teresa has put together and the staff here at the library, they want to give something good away, something that means something to them. You see this wall over here, these pictures. Those are former people who have received gifts here. And it's an important wall, an important memory of those that were once here that received these gifts. It's a very prominent place. And for us to be here in Indian country and to hear Indian music and to see Indian gift giving and to see somebody receive an award as this is important this morning. And another reason I'm so very glad on behalf of the library to say thank you for being here. You know, today we give things away, and many times it looks like a woolen blanket. Maybe it's a Pendleton. In the old days, in our ancestors, we didn't have Pendleton wools. We had buffalo robes. And for many of us, that presentation of a robe, a buffalo robe, meant many things. It meant survival in the coldness of the winter. It was something of value to have a buffalo robe, a complete robe from a buffalo given to you. Because there was a lot that went into it, the creature's life and the getting the robe ready and all of the things that went along with it. There's many things that went along besides just getting the skin of an animal. There was a lot to that. And with that, there were a lot of people involved in just preparation of such an article as a buffalo robe. But to have that and to have it presented to somebody and to present it to receive one, it was a very valuable gift. But today we don't have access to do that. We don't go and hunt buffalo anymore and skin them, and we don't do that. But we've kind of changed a little bit, and we go and we get many times the blankets, beautiful blankets now that come out of Pendleton, Oregon, Pendleton wool mills, and other places, mills that provide beautiful blankets. And for many of us, we don't have a word in our languages that means blankets. It really means robe. We're going to give them a robe. And those kind of things come down. So we're at that part of the morning here as we have an award plus a robe, a blanket to present. And it is at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. John Ghostbear, Mr. Will Hill to come forward, and also Dr. Horse, please come forward, as it is at this time that we're going to go into your part.
Cool. Okuma Gourd, bet all hard. Aingo, he do. Any on go day. Take a home ball. Or he'll go, tape go bando. Gourd, he dog. Time pay ye do. They cope. I'll salt it to you. Oga, eagle. Yakomba do, honk yago a dog, goigu, they poi, Tom hill. Mom go on my team, so gago, 8 day on high gido. Oh God, a koi honda gido, on go to high gido. On the unsalt, they so gag, a koi go on 8 don. Law, go politics. Policies, go business, go education, get down me. You go on high, get down. Yama go ne. They go, yata go ado, hara do, teko. Eondi dom tai. United States, go sai pegu, dom gya gido, Canada. Go te dom tai. Domon tum all top all. Main high gya, and go kyan he do de. Ene on go de. Engo oko it o gigido. They hon de bait mots I ki gom do. Ogo constitution, law, go policies on gyakom. Go 8 day on 8 day hon get high go. Go more get gihe. Oya do untain so gya. Engo. Any on go they do. Go yata go ado me go guse tankya. Anim don't keep up ampedo. Engo ego do all gugedo. Go pono go honde out. They hondi on high gido. Oya do to. And get salt they buy it. Oga sai get dode. 1988 go kyap. 2000 kyap. One hour battle do go. They go. And salt they tain so gyap. Oko it on get do. And baton. Oklahoma City Law School. Motem ki do. Supreme Court, Sai got the Yadom Combo. Oklahoma Indian Affairs Commission. Oklahoma Governor's Office. Oklahoma at Hope Day. They go Monday, Motim ya good on me. Okoi Dong ya on Baton 100 million acres go Indians and the U.S. Constitution, a forgotten legacy. 1971, Gedor de Kep, 1983, Gep. 8 de Montaigne, Gep, good on me. And go, Hido. Eagle, Katago, bait on de. Go eat more him. On go tendo, de so. Yokoi gugo. Dogudo, on him town hill. Ogo Oaks Indian Mission, Yadome go, nation building for native youth. Ye de gogo, bedo. Ote ho get good. I hope what don't get.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to present a bio for Mr. Kirke Kickingbird, and you just heard it. I can't top that. So at this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Kirke Kickingbird, please come to the stage. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a Kodak moment. So you'll see the award presentation happening right now. At this time, we're going to ask our singers for appropriate honor song. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll stand in honor of our recipient, a round of applause for Mr. Kirke Kickingbird.
Hey!
you, singers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Mr. Kirke Kickingbird and your family. You know, ladies and gentlemen, when a song is rendered for you as an honor song, it doesn't get any better than that in Indian country. A song was rendered for him, and so family members, spouses, children, dear friends all come up. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kirke Kickingbird.
Rather than do a speech, what I've decided to do today is read from my books. We'll be here a little while. These are really by way of example of some things I'm going to talk about. I do appreciate the American Indian Resource Center and the Tulsa Library, and thank you for this honor. I have, as you could tell from, perhaps not directly from Perry's biography presentation, I've written quite a few books, quite a few articles, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. But one of my associates at my law firm at the Sovereign Symposium a couple of years ago introduced me to a young law student who was just dying to meet me. And he came up and said, gosh, Kirke Kickingbird, I've read everything you've ever written. Pause. I didn't know you were still alive. So thank you for this opportunity to talk while I'm still alive. One of the things that my friend Vine Deloria talked about, and I remembered, I think, from Joe Gary's a memorial banquet at NCAI, was, you know, why can't we tell Indians we appreciate them while they're still alive? And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of that appreciation that I have, because in 1970, when I got out of law school and went to D.C., Perry was one of the first people I met, Ace and Bud Samant. We were all involved in a lot of the activities, particularly about Indian education at the time. It was the celebration of words in the Indian Education Act that we dealt with at that time. But words have always been a sort of festival in my life because the opportunity to be read to by grandparents and my parents or read a book on my own later, that was always a time of celebration. So words have been very important to me. Adults always indulged my interest in reading and encouraged me. In the kindergarten and school in the 1950s, books and radio ignited the imagination because, unlike today's television and internet and all of that, you had to fill in the faces, the costumes, the scenery. And out of that, if you didn't understand something, in my household, where we went was to the encyclopedia to find out more. That's where my mother and father directed me. We had a little thing called the Book of Knowledge, which wasn't exactly your Britannica subject, almost like dictionary, like you look up by name and alphabet. Scattered in it were poetry and articles, children's stories like Coley Bay, the Outlaw Horse. But also, as you look for these things, you'd run across pictures of ancient legends of the Greeks, the Trojan War, pictures of the Trojan horse, pictures of the Parthenon and other classical ruins, sculptures, painting from the Middle Ages or the 18th century, and artifacts from ancient archaeological digs. So all of this fostered the imagination, fed the imagination, encouraged the imagination. So one also had to be able to read in those days to look at the back of the cereal box and find out how to get your decoder ring with the glow-in-the-dark belt from Wheat Checks or Rice Checks, and courtesy of Space Patrol. I got a couple of tickets to be the first passenger to the moon, courtesy of Sergeant Preston, the radio show. I got ownership of a square inch of land in the Northwest Territories in Canada. So there were a lot of exciting things that reading meant in my childhood. Childhood also meant visiting my Kiowa grandparents' place west of Anadarko at Apache Y. As you go north on the road to Redstone, top of the hill, there was a yellow and white striped barn. There's a concrete cellar to hide in during bad thunderstorms where there might be a tornado. Cornfields and wheat reel fields surrounded the place. There was a hand pump outside the back door about 20 feet out that constituted the running water of the place. There were kerosene lamps. I always like to say koel, more mysterious. And there was a scary walk to the outhouse at dusk. In those days, there were Walt Disney films based on classic books like Treasure Island, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Old Yeller. Those were all inspiration for reading as well. It was see the movie, read the book. There's too much video material today, and I don't think that reading is encouraged in quite the same way. And certainly not long bursts, 2 or 3 words and you move on. Well, in the fall of 1957, the Russians put Sputnik into orbit, and it sparked a change in the U.S. attitude. It heated up the Cold War, the space age began, the space race was on. And one of the effect it had was on school and their curriculum. They shifted to emphasize science and math. And I happened to be in one of those groups that got the accelerated classes, starting in the last of the 8th grade and as we went into high school. In fact, I say the 9th grade is where the first time I met Darth Vader personally, when he was going by the name Corinne Jewett and teaching English and Latin. There were reams of homework, multiple essays per week, hundreds of vocabulary words, and that was just the Latin class where she was going easy on us. The English class was twice as hard. We felt like those galley slaves in some Roman ship in a time of Caesar. It was really hard work. One of the things that also happened during those days was the Boy Scout troops were invited to usher at the OU football games. We also ended up at college campuses a lot for our speech and music contests. So we were hanging around student unions 4 years before we actually went to college, and we were quite comfortable with colleges when we actually got there. But one of the exciting things was their bookstores. They couldn't compare with the little bookstore in El Reno or even the Carnegie Library in El Reno. And so those were exciting things. We discovered the Folger's library edition of Shakespeare's plays, which contained footnotes that explained what the Bard's English was all about. Otherwise, it was a semi-puzzlement. So all of this drew us to reading like a magnet. So the other inspirations of the era, of course, was Kennedy's speeches. Sparked us about service to the country and community. And my parents were active in a lot of the usual things, the parents' associations to raise money for the band and instruments, various other kinds of activities like boys. They handled the Boy and Girl Scout troops as student sponsors. My dad coached the boys baseball and girls softball. My mom was involved in a thing called Calamity Janes, a civil defense disaster preparedness group. And they practiced by helping out at storm-ravaged towns around Oklahoma. Their husbands were the auxiliaries, which is an interesting gender role reversal for that time. Leadership traditions come to me also because of some family things. Chief Kickingbird, who died in 1875, was reported by the Army officers of his day to be the greatest Kiowa battlefield leader and handled light cavalry they'd ever seen. And of course, they'd done a lot of that just in a few years previous in the Civil War. And when Santana and Big Tree were imprisoned in Texas, he led a delegation to the Texas governor to argue for their freedom and managed to accomplish the release. The next generation was Preacher Kickingbird, who'd started as a Sergeant Kickingbird in Troop L of the 7th Cavalry there at Fort Sill. He served as scout, courier, and lawman, rounding up horse thieves and cattle thieves. Perry's forebears were also in Troop L and did the same kind of things. His son, Paul, my grandfather, died before he was 20 of tuberculosis. So my father was next in line, and he'd worked on the Kiowa Constitutional Committee in the 1960s, served on the Business Committee in the 1970s, and served as the judge, the head of the hearing board, Kiowa Hearing Board in the 1980s. The variety of activities that we are available to us kind of pushed this on. But one of the things in high school for me, I was in all the activities, student liaison to the men's clubs around town, went to Boys State, got selected for Boys State, gave the commencement address when we graduated. I got the fair-haired boy treatment. And just a quick glance to tell you, I'm not the fair-haired boy, all right? But the Shiner Uppo kids from nearby Concho didn't get the same cordial reception. I was Kiowa. I wasn't from Concho. I was okay. And that was an interesting phenomena, an interesting learning thing about prejudice. It's not rational by any means. My first encounter with prejudice, how I say, began years before. When my mother wanted me to go to kindergarten, she wanted the best education for her son. The only one available was at the Catholic school. We were Baptists. The deacons objected. My mother replied, and I went to kindergarten. It's another example of how things are not rational with respect to prejudice. Things aren't always rosy, don't get that idea. But usually when someone popped off a sharp reply, words again, usually calmed that down, or a willingness to stand your ground sometimes was necessary. But when someone doesn't like you, the feelings are intense, almost like those portable electric heaters. You can really feel it focused on you. And sometimes when people don't like you for no reason, you're certainly aware of it. The other thing about the family traditions of leadership, I remember Dad got a lot of requests for help from family and friends, and sometimes it was obvious, like things like money. Sometimes they needed a spokesman. Sometimes they just needed somebody to listen to. And I know invariably driving from El Reno to Anadarko, Dad always picked up the young Indian men who were hitchhiking, remembering his hitchhiking days. One time he even mortgaged our house to provide the retainer for an attorney for one of my cousins who had got into some serious legal troubles, and paid the retainer until his family could arrange to provide the costs. At OU, President George Cross then had started a president's leadership class, and I got selected for that, and there were about 30 high school students from across the state. We got to have meetings with university administrators, talking about what they did and about special lectures from special professors, experts in their field. So we learned more. It was more words, but we also learned how institutional structures are operated, which was very important later on. I actually began working on some Indian legal issues in the summer of '68 when John Melendo, who's then director of NCAI, came down and called me and had dinner with me and said NCI had a treaty project. This is between the second and third year of law school. And wanted me to do the research of the project. It was being run by a guy, his immediate predecessor who had gone to law school, a guy named Vine DeLaurier Jr. And that was my first introduction to Cohen's Handbook of Indian Law. There weren't a whole lot of Indian law courses in those days. Ran into old Professor Merrill up in the stack, way up in the attic of the old law school, and asked me what I was doing. And he said not only talked to me about Kapler's or Cohen, but also Kapler's Laws and Treaties. So I got an introduction that was very sound. But I graduated in '69, sworn into the bar, began a job search. Boyce Timmons, who is the registrar at OU, was a Cherokee, and he was a lawyer. In the 1930s, when he got out, he couldn't find a job, so he took the position as registrar at the university. He's very active in NCAI, and he and his wife, Alice, who ran the Western History Collection, were on that way to that year's meeting of NCAI in Albuquerque. And he said, well, why don't you come with me? I said, I'm barely got enough money to drive to these interviews around the state. And he said, well, we'll give you a ride. And he found me a free place to stay. And I was going through the lobby of the old Hilton Down, which was downtown by the railroad tracks. And he said, hey, I got an interview with the new Commissioner of Indian Affairs. He said, come with me. It's supposed to be a 10-minute interview, lasted a half hour. And every 2 minutes, a voice would say, did I say he just graduated from law school and got sworn into the bar? 2 weeks later, I got a call. And by Thanksgiving, I was working in Washington, D.C. in the Congressional Relations Office at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it was a really exciting time. Because of that, I met Perry, I met Bud and H. Samant. They were, and Cleet Sapudla, who isn't here today. It was a really exciting time. A lot of legislation was being promoted to support particularly Indian education. Nixon had issued an Indian policy statement in the summer of 1970, which is the best policy statement in the second half of the 20th century. And it dealt with self-determination, Indian termination, tribal control of federal programs, restoration of the sacred lands at Taos Blue Lake, and economic development through the Indian Financing Act, increased financial support at both BIA and IHS kinds of programs, assistance for urban Indians, establishment of an Indian Trust Council authority to get Indians out from under interior injustice, and establishment of the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs to raise the profile and authority of the head of the Indian Affairs. All of this actually did not come to fruition for another decade. But what happened at the time is a number of us were sent all over the country to talk about that legislation. And we got to know people from different tribal leaders from different parts of the country. Perry and I ended up on a task force to see how Title I ES, Elementary Secondary Education Act funds were used in BIA boarding schools. There was a small allocation for them. We would find there was so little money. At some places where they had a tape recorder, some of the teachers would hide microphones from one another or the electric cord from one another so it couldn't be used to preserve its life and longevity because they had so little resources. They were afraid someone would use it and break it. And so it gives you a feeling for the state of things in Indian country. Out of that, our feeling was that we were sort of like the motto you see on the side of police cars, preserve and protect. That's what we saw as our role with respect to Indian programs, Indian people, and Indian governments. The government moved too slowly for my satisfaction, so I left and founded a legal research center with Vine and a fellow named Frank Ducheneau. And out of that, at that time, things began to happen. The Indian Education Act was passed. The Nixon administration was concerned about going over budget. He performed a maneuver called impoundment, which meant he wasn't going to spend the money, even though Congress had appropriated it. It started with Highway Act monies, and despite his great speech on Indian affairs, the new monies, the new $18 million to start the Indian Education Act, was picked for impoundment. So I was now out in private work. A friend of ours from D.C., Helen Scherbeck, got together with the Coalition of Indian Controlled School Boards, and they hired us largely under her prompting. And by us, I mean John Gosper, Vine Deloria, Ralph Keene. Ralph Keene didn't stay with the project, but we sued Nixon to get the money out. And the problem was there was a deadline involved. If the money wasn't spent, it would go back to the Treasury. Al Redman filed suit on behalf of his son in Wyoming, small school in Wyoming, applied for the money, and our we were sweating how long this would take. Would they be turned down so they would be injured and have a standing to bring a lawsuit? All of it took place. We had about 4 months to spare, filed a suit. The pleadings were that thick, and at the last, as we were getting them prepared for the filing, John and I took a day and night shift to try to get them all done. And we were successful. So in those days, There was a lot of concern, a lot of energy, a lot of action, and as Perry and John and I talked about last night, there was a lot of passion that existed for those people who worked in Indian affairs. It felt, probably to us anyway, it felt like being one of the 300 Spartans at the Thermopylae Pass. There was just so many obstacles, so many power and forces against us, and the Persians just kept coming. We worked on some reform ideas. We worked on getting the Indian Education Act implemented, and truly felt desperate in trying to get some of these things done because they were either administrative deadlines or these legal deadlines to try to get this done. So we managed to get the job accomplished. The Indian Education Act was started. Went on to some other projects, largely consisting of these books I'm talking about. The private research center, the first thing we did was 100 Million Acres. Vine's Custer Died for Your Sins had made a great hit. Ralph Nader had started his policy centers and was making a lot of notoriety. And so we were doing the same in the Indian arena with 100 Million Acres. We found that these remained in a lot of places on Long Island and New York, but the people out west of the Mississippi couldn't get their hands on one. So we changed our approach and began to do books that we would publish and in conjunction with a training program for tribal leadership and tribal administrative staff. They consisted of things like Indian sovereignty, Indian jurisdiction, Indian treaties. These are things all the leaders talked about, but nobody talked at much in depth. In fact, in those days, in talking about sovereignty, it was kind of like talking about sex. You didn't talk about it openly or publicly. Kind of whispered around it, talked behind the barn. Or we'd hear from people in some of our training courses, some of the tribal leaders would say, well, don't be talking about that too much. The superintendent might hear you, and my boy works for the BIA, and he might get fired. So there's a lot of fear in those days. It was just a completely different time. Some of my staff referred to it, particularly because of the sovereignty book, as Kirke's pushy Indian course. But it did result in people talking a lot more about the issues and a lot more knowledgeably about the Indians. We finally got back to educating the public, which had been our first goal, in things like this book, Indian is in the U.S. Constitution. And we adapted the program for high school students. This is a book called Youth for Tribal Government, which we developed with Unity, and we've been doing a similar program about nation building for Native youth. It follows those same themes. We'd worked with the Florida Governor's Commission on Indian Affairs and a special summer program for high school students down there. So we've been trying to spread this knowledge and information as far and as wide as we can, and it's beginning to take hold a little bit. It's slower than we would like, and occasionally we see some regression. However, one of the things that popped up then was after the Indian Education Act, that dissatisfaction with the termination led to and the issue about funding programs led to a takeover of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington in the fall of 1972. That spring, we had the siege at Wounded Knee. So Indian affairs became very prominent. Our books became very meaningful and a useful resource to Indian communities and Indian leadership. Congress' response to those two events was to establish what they called the American Indian Policy Review Commission, a special congressional commission of 3 senators, 3 representatives, and 5 Indian civilians to look at the policy and recommended changes. We got it done in a 2-year time frame with over 8,000 pages of material in 14 volumes. And it's really served as the foundation for Indian policy for the last 30 years. Well, having saved all the Indians in the United States, I turned to Canada because I got an invite to work with the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations and the Assembly of First Nations for the purpose of, Pierre Trudeau was intent on getting a new Canadian Constitution. Under their system, it's all a delegation down from the Queen. So they wanted a homegrown document. Looked like the Crown was going to agree to it. But one issue was, what was the place of Canadian Indian nations in the Canadian Constitution? They wanted to be ranked with the federal government of Canada and the provinces as a government, so that they would be a third order government. In fact, they sent me on an assignment to the UN, and that pressure, along with some other political activities, made it possible for them to be named as a third order of government in the Canadian Constitution. I'd already been to the UN once on a land conference, and I got invited again, having saved all the Indians in North America. I then moved on to the UN. I served on a U.S. delegation in 88-89 to rewrite a international labor conference, which talked about bringing indigenous peoples into workforces, national workforces, and it dealt with things like, wages, hours, benefits. In the rewrite, which took place in 88 and 89, it also expanded to cultural issues, environmental issues, and territorial rights, and it went into force and effect in 1991, when a minimum number of countries signed the convention. So that was the end of my work on the treaty research project for NCAI. It felt like they had, working on a real and modern treaty affecting indigenous rights was pretty satisfied. So now, having saved all the Indians in the United States, Canada, and the world, it was either go to the galaxy or focus on some special interests, and I'd lost those 2 tickets to the moon I'd acquired long ago. So I decided to accept the invitation to teach at OCU Law School and run the Indian Law Center there. And it was good to come home. We worked on some development of tribal court systems, improvement. One of my colleagues, then a student, now a judge, Liz Brown, is in the audience back there. And she worked very hard to help make that center a success. We have further expanded our training. We now have also for the adults a Leading Your Tribe in the 21st Century for business committees and senior staff at the tribal level. All this variety of things led John to describe me as the Indian Professor Irwin Corey. Now, I don't know if some of you may not be old enough to remember Irwin Corey from The Tonight Show or other talk shows. He was a comedian, usually appearing as a professorial type, but with a top hat and a black tuxedo. And he billed himself, his shtick was the world's foremost expert. Now, he didn't say in what, he was just the world's foremost expert. So to John, I became the world's Indian's foremost expert. I was once curator for an exhibit called Moving the Far, which dealt with Indian removal to Oklahoma. And this is around 1991. It was made up of paintings and pictures that talked about removal and the impact of removal. It opened in January of 1993 at the International Monetary Fund in D.C. And it was also a celebratory night because there was a presidential inauguration taking place. And the whole thing was scheduled to coincide with the UN's declaration of 1993 as the International Year of the World's Indigenous Peoples. So that international focus has been started and maintained. But the exhibit kept going. I will periodically hit the internet and find it appearing in Florida or Ohio, and a couple of years ago it recycled back through Oklahoma. It seems to have a lasting influence because the pictures or the paintings really make an impact on people. It's one of the photos we use, and it's also used out at the Heard Museum on an exhibit on boarding schools, is the Indian students in traditional dress with long hair, and then the next day they're boarding school pictures in uniforms with short hair. And it's really a dramatic change. And that's what we've been dealing with in all of our work, whether it's in education, as Perry has done, or law, where I've worked. Most of our work really is about getting the United States to live up to its promises and obligations in the treaties. And the struggle of the United States to put its values into practice plays more like the Walt Disney Donald Duck cartoon, in which our favorite duck has a little angel duck dressed in white robes on one shoulder and a little devil duck dressed in red on the other shoulder. And the question is, who shall prevail? It's clearly a choice between good and evil. That's just fundamentally the story and struggle of Indian policy. Felix Cohen, the lawyer who compiled the Handbook of Federal Indian Law in the 40s, described the foundations of Indian policy from Spanish colonial days as encompassing 4 principles. And they are adopted by all the colonial powers and really come into play in Indian policy in the United States for these hundreds of years. And these principles were the political equality of the races, tribal self-government, national sovereignty in Indian affairs, that is, a limited role for first the colonies and then the states, and governmental protection of Indian rights, that is, the national government will protect the Indians, their rights and their property. And one can still measure the soundness of Indian policy by how well these principles are honored, and as a consequence, one knows whether the devil or the angel has prevailed. So, let's renew our efforts, let's look at those words, let's build our skills, and make sure that the angel prevails. Thank you.
You know, as I said earlier, you look around in this room, you see a lot of individuals who have done many things for Native America, for the Indian peoples, for education, for all of these things. And Mr. Kickingbird has been right there, and his colleagues are here too, young and old. And I'm glad to be a part of this award, and your family has come a long ways to be here, and for all of you to hear this gentleman speak. It comes to that time of the morning that we're in our closure. We want to thank all of you for coming and spending your Saturday morning with us, and for some that have driven quite a distance to be here, from Albuquerque and from the center of the universe, from Hobart, Oklahoma. For all you guys, we want to say thank you for coming. On behalf of the Tulsa City County Library and our American Indian Resource Center and the board and the directors of the library here, we want to say thank you. Thank you for your attendance today, and thank you for being here. That closes out our morning. We're going to have our singers, if they would, a couple of songs as we can exit out to their music, and we're done.